Why, hello there, dear guest. It's been a long time. This whole thing? Well, it ain't nothing. You know, truth be told, actually, I fancy myself a bit of a blues player. What have I got to be so blue about? Well, truth be told, I fancy myself a bit of a paranormal enthusiast, and this is the second story in a row where spoilers, probably don't actually believe that the source material has any supernatural factuality to it at all. Like I don't really believe in this one. It's tragic, really, when one hears tales of famous musicians selling their souls to demonic forces in exchange for fame and fortune, and it turns out not to be true. It really scratches that supernatural itch, but according to all my demon friends, nobody can really take credit for this one down there, so made my conclusions. And what might tonight's story be, I hear you ask? Well, dear guest, if you happen to fall in the middle of the Venn diagram of music historians and paranormal enthusiasts, and also know how to read, then tonight's subject should come as no surprise to you. Except for the aforementioned plot twist, where I don't actually believe in this one. But, after we cue the intro theme, I'll get into it more in the hot open. Welcome to the Foxhole and Foxxo Esoterica. I promise I was sober when I wrote this. Welcome back to Foxxo Esoterica, your premium purveyor of paranormal parables, produced primarily by a prolific prognosticator, partial pervert, and part-time poetry partaker. This particular prankster prophet poet goes by the name of Foxxo Fox, and if you can't discern, he's watched a bit of, BoJack Horseman. The subject of tonight's video is the king of the Delta blues singers himself, Robert Leroy Johnson. The man literally designated by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as the, quote, first ever rock star. Johnson's influence on the history of music itself is perhaps only overshadowed by a particularly enigmatic legend that sticks to Johnson like a proverbial hellhound on one's trail. According to legend, Robert Johnson found his success at the cost of his immortal soul, bargained to the devil himself in exchange for fame and fortune. And where else could such a legendary encounter with Satan occur, other than at a darkened, moonlit Mississippian crossroads? Now, believe it or not, the history of all music does not actually begin in the year 1937, and Robert Johnson is far from the only figure in folklore to go down to the crossroads and fall down on his knees. But it is at this particular intersection, this crossroads, if you will, that another enduring legend sprung forth. The 27 Club, a phenomenon that Wikipedia calls, quote, an informal list pertaining to musicians that pass away in their 27th year of existence. That particular legend is less cool than Robert Johnson himself, and also something that I, designated supernatural things believer, do not believe in. But it is important to bring up, because I don't think that such a culturally significant informal list would exist were it not for Robert Johnson's proverbial, probably apocryphal, and lore-wise fateful trip to the crossroads. Bargains, burials, beelzebubs, and blues. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Foxxo Esoterica. So I have a content warning for you this evening, and that content warning revolves around racism. The story of Robert Johnson involves the story of a black man living in the American South in the 1930s, so naturally aspects of racism will show up in this story, so do be warned if that is something you're uncomfortable with. There will be references to white supremacists, but do know that there is no gratuitous depiction of death or violence or anything. You know, now that I'm typing this, I'm just now realizing that this is my second episode in a row wherein the protagonist sells his soul to the devil for something. That wasn't intentional. It was subconsciously placed into my brain by demons to spread the infernal gospel. Today we're rocking the slutty professor vibe, where I've got like a button up and a tie, but a cool little long shirt over it. I'm gonna overheat very quickly and regret this. Also, if you can't tell, I finally found a way to get it so that way my microphone works, so I don't have to record this on my phone. So the audio will be a little bit better. I hope. We'll see. But on to the encyclopedic collection. Tonight, we are going to be cracking open the Folked Up collection, which is a series that stems from the Iramabu Phantasma series, tales that relate specifically to the paranormal and supernatural aspects, but more from a human folkloric angle as opposed to a modern look at the ghost angle. But we are also going to be cracking open the biographical series, the People Are Strange reference. And look at that, I made it Jim Morrison, member of the 27 Club and singer of the band The Doors, which in that encyclopedic collection is based off of title-wise. The demons are really good at this whole subconscious thing. You'd think that even though Germany only has, beers brewed within the standards of the beer purity laws, that is a very German-sounding phrase, that you'd still be able to find something wherein on the logo there's a devil or a demon or hell or something like that. But I have been unsuccessful, and I went to 2 different stores today. So, for our potion brewed, I'm going to be drinking amaretto. This is the Casella amaretto liqueur, and I'm going to be drinking for YouTube again. It's a little chilled. I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but I love chilling things. And I'm not doing shots because amaretto sounds like something you sip. And I'm using my cute skull cup. And I'm going to try not to get the whiskers of the mask in the alcohol that I'm about to drink. Oh my god, why don't I ever get amaretto? Oh my god, that's smooth as hell. The nutty is there. I like the nuts. I think it's hazelnut, but don't quote me. It's just smooth, and it's tasty. And it's sweet in a way that I enjoy, with the alcohol undertones that make it not just like, oh, here's a sweet Starbucks drink. It's 21.5%, which I'm not in college anymore, so I usually don't look at the percentages. But considering that this is a really smooth alcohol, I'm kind of surprised it's that high. I like it a lot, and I'm glad that I'm going to be drinking something good this evening, even though it doesn't relate to the story. Skull. Yeah, I can't find a single fucking devil-themed alcohol anywhere, and I tried hard. It's all fucking Waldemeister, and here's a goat, and here's my seal. My family has brewed this for 1,000 generations. No devils.
Cards on the table. I'm burying 0 leads this evening. There are no particularly dramatic supernatural twists to this tale to disclose in the introductory bit. The sale of souls to Satan is this story's supernatural selling point. And so, as Julie Andrews incessantly recommends, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. The very beginning of Robert Johnson's life took place in the city of Hazelhurst in the U.S. state of Mississippi. The year was 1911, and the month was May. Some sources claim that he was born on the 8th of May, but like many other aspects of this story, there exists a lack of certainty to that claim. Johnson's mother was a woman by the name of Julia Major Dodds, who was married to a barber and also carpenter and also construction worker named Charles Dodds, who also sold furniture. Though Charles Dodds is not Robert's father. That would be a Noah Johnson, who does not feature again in this story. It wouldn't take long for tragedy to affect the Dodds family, though, for indeed, before Robert Johnson was even conceived, white supremacists antagonized the Dodds family. The sole reason was the fact that Dodds had delivered firewood to the house of a woman that a white man was actively courting at the time. A posse attacked Dodds with knives in his store and threatened Julia and her family with violence for 2 straight weeks if they didn't leave Hazelhurst. They would have killed Charles Dodds if he didn't stay hidden en route to an escape train. And indeed, before such an escalation could occur, Dodds successfully fled to Memphis, changing his last name to Spencer as a safety precaution. Almost a year later, Robert Johnson was born, Julia having met up with Noah as she stayed behind. Though Robert wouldn't even exit infancy by the time Julia sent Robert to Memphis. Young Robert would attend school for the next 8 years, and it was here, in the heart of Memphis, that he would discover the emergent and enigmatic blues genre of music. He even began to learn about musicianship and performance at such an age, and he would receive his first guitar from his older sister, Carrie, one of Julia's elder children. Johnson wouldn't stay in Memphis for long, however, and would move over to Lucas Township in Arkansas to live with his mother, who moved there to remarry a man named Will Dusty Willis. Charles Dodds would also remarry, so while a divorce is insinuated in the narrative, it seems as though it was an amicable split. Over the next decade, Johnson would move back and forth from Arkansas to the town of Commerce in Mississippi, and even to Memphis a few times, as well as everywhere in between. It was also around this point where Robert decided to take his biological father's last name. And it was also around this time that Johnson married a younger girl by the name of Virginia Travis. She was 16 when Johnson was 18. But this would soon turn into tragedy when Virginia would immediately pass away due to complications from childbirth, not even a full year since the wedding. Such a tragedy affected Robert Johnson so much that it was henceforth that he would dedicate his life entirely to the pursuit of music.
But indeed, though I claim to bury no supernatural lead this evening, I cannot deny my canine impulse to bury things, and thus we are left with a lead left unburied. The fact that the Robert Johnson Crossroads mythology only manifested well after the singer's death. Sure, tales of Faustian transactions at the Crossroads were told around the blues community, but mostly as little jokes or bits or anecdotes. No one ever took them seriously, and no one ever associated Robert Johnson with them while he was alive. Additionally, take a look at the 12-bar Crossroad Blues, and you'll see that the entire song is completely devoid of any satanic iconography.
Here, actually take the time to listen to the lyrics. Wait a second. Googling something. Oh my god, every day I learn and relearn that if your song isn't fucking 1849 whatever Yankee Doodle Dandy, it's probably not in the public domain, because the legal realm of copyright law is a mire of confusion and... Wait a second, Googling something. Yankee Doodle Dandy was a biographical musical written in 1942. That's not even in the public domain, oh my lord! Wait. It's a movie based on the song from 1902, originally sung by George M. Cohan. It may be safe, but not the 1942 recording with James Cagney. This is an educational video, right? Would you say? Like I'm not that committed to monetization, but okay. I have an idea. The following is an educationally focused look at the lyrics to Robert Johnson's Crossroad Blues. This is also a parody. It is sung and performed by Forseti Fox on the ukulele, but as mentioned before, it is also a parody. So this bit seemed a lot funnier when I wrote it down, and it's starting to get a little bit less funny now that I actually have to commit to it. This song is on the ukulele, because I don't have a guitar on me. Never rehearsed it in my life. We're guessing. I went down to the crossroads, key C major, fell down on my knees. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. Ask the Lord above have mercy, save poor Bob if you please. You'll notice the reference to God instead of the devil. That's because Robert Johnson isn't making a deal with the devil. Back to the key of C major, like Robert Johnson intended. Standing at the crossroads, I tried to flag a ride. Standing at the crossroads, I tried to flag a ride. Didn't nobody seem to know me, everybody passed me by. You can actually see here that Robert Johnson is trying to hitchhike. He seems confident enough in his musical ability as is to not additionally ask strangers to supernaturally improve his voice. The sun going down, boy, dark's gonna catch me here. Ooh, the sun going down, boy, dark gonna catch me here. I haven't got no sweet loving hot guy that actually love and feel my care. Actually, in the original song, Robert Johnson says woman instead of hot guy. That change was actually a change that I made. I may or may not have mentioned this earlier, but some of the lyrics are changed because I'm actually performing a parody of the Crossroad Blues. I don't know if I mentioned that this is a parody yet. You can run, tell my friend Willie Brown. You can run, tell my friend boy Willie Brown. Willie Brown's another Delta blues musician, bit of a mentor figure for Johnson, will be showing up later. Lord, that I'm standing at the crossroad, Dave. I believe I'm sinking down. I also think Johnson just called God Babe here, so that's affectionate. I don't think he shares that level of affection with Lucifer, so even despite him sinking down a little, we're not gassing Lucifer up. I went down to the crossroad, mama. I think that the construction site is a really fun bit. I looked east and west. It's because it's repeated because it's fucking 12 blues. I'm smart. I went down to the crossroad, lady. I looked east and west. But I didn't have no sweet hot guy who bathed in my distress. Crossroad Blues parody. But yeah, I think he's just hitchhiking and lamenting about poverty and an inability to travel nor improve his state. And also, maybe he's a little bit horny. But I don't think he's trying to improve his career by means of asking Satan for favors in this song, like, at all. And that's the point that I want to make, that I'll expand upon later. This infernal origin story actually began to develop a full 2 years after Robert Johnson's death, and it might be due to the fact that a larger white audience began to discover his music, and were curious onto how Johnson developed, quote, mastery of the guitar so quickly. You know, the instrument that he had been practicing since the age of 8. So let's see if we can spot the theme of tonight's story, folks. Let's see if you figured out the theme I'm gonna be going for with this episode. Also, to all the haters, second take. That was the second take, haters. This is probably the longest introductory bit that I've done to date, so let's take the time to actually look at the sources before I forget about them. Looking at the screen, looking at the... Oh shit, this is one of those moments where you need glasses. Alrighty, to start off with the sources, I used Wikipedia, baby. One particularly helpful website outside of Wikipedia that I used, though, and probably was the major jumping off point for a lot of my research, was the Robert Johnson Blues Foundation. For both biographical reasons about Robert Johnson, but also just like fun facts about blues itself. It's a good website. I also used the book Brother Robert, Growing Up with Robert Johnson, written by Anya C. Anderson, who was Johnson's stepsister and a daughter of Charles Dodds. I also used the book Searching for Robert Johnson, written by Peter Guralnick. And I also used the book Biography of a Phantom, a Robert Johnson Blues Odyssey, written by Mac McCormick. When it turns out when your subject material is like a real person, people tend to write more books about him, so he's not a ghost, and as thus, I need to read a lot more. And I was doing bits earlier, but I used Wikipedia a lot for the magical Crossroads stuff. I'm gonna be real. Otherwise, every article is like, Robert Johnson at the Crossroads saw Satan, died at 27, and that's crazy. That's the myth. And Wikipedia covered it enough for my tastes.
And so, we once again portage from the introductory tributary to the inexorable flow of the passage of time itself. Robert Johnson had decided to completely partake in the life of an itinerant blues singer. No longer would he simply dip his toes in the pool. And it is the next chapter of this story that introduces Johnson to two different musical inspirations in his life. The aforementioned Willie Brown, and the currently getting mentioned Isaiah Ike Zimmerman. However, not only would these men teach Johnson the ways of the blues singer, they would also constantly find themselves being used anecdotally whenever people look up Johnson's biography for potentially haunted origin. And here's why. Brown's musical partner, a man by the name of Son House,
He made house music.
would recount an instance where he and Willie Brown ranted about Robert Johnson's inability to play the guitar well. This is important to those looking for instances where someone claimed that Robert Johnson was bad at guitar until one day he suddenly wasn't. But maybe Willie Brown was just a big... Ike Zimmerman, however, has a far juicier anecdote. Inasmuch as the anecdote isn't just these guys noticed that Robert Johnson was bad at guitar until one day he wasn't. Ike Zimmerman was said to have visited graveyards in the middle of the night and come back with mastery of the guitar. He was even said to have taken Robert Johnson to the moonlit groves of the dead himself, to bestow upon him the same supernatural boon. But I would now like to spoil the suspense by explaining that Johnson and Zimmerman simply practiced in these locations because it was quiet and private. That's really the only reason. These men were more than mere backstory characters, however. The likes of Brown, House, and Zimmerman were prolific members of the blues community. Willie Brown even learned his trade from a man named Charles Patton, who is credited as being one of the first, if not the first, blues player to implement the Delta blues style. In the juke joints of Robinsonville and Drew, Mississippi, these blues players would mingle, and a young Robert Johnson would spend a considerable amount of time in their company. He even picked up on the harp and harmonica under House's and Brown's instructions. But as I mentioned earlier, everyone bullied him for being a bad guitar player, because he was a literal child.
And even when he was a little older, because learning an instrument takes time. And also, when I was talking about the harp earlier, I was talking about the Jew's harp, also known as the jaw harp, and not this harp. This kind of harp,
harp blues has yet to hit the culture, as it turns out, even to this day. Famous blues musician Howlin' Wolf also ran with this crew, and it's not that important to the story, but I happen to be a prolific Howlin' Wolf fan in regards to, like, the blues canon, so I just thought it was really neat.
Going back to Son House for a moment, he's a particularly important piece in the puzzle of Johnson's life, inasmuch as he was getting interviewed during the 50s and 60s, when the general public was trying to get a mythology going on Robert Johnson. This has the unintentional effect of Son House also kind of leaning into the deal with the devil stuff, though it is important to note that he did tell tales of another blues singer, a man named Tommy Johnson, no relation, who was also often gossiped about for meeting with a tall black man one night at the Crossroads who tuned Tommy's guitar, left quietly, and prompted Tommy to be good at guitar all of a sudden. Other reports found out by a Texas blues historian by the name of Mac McCormick tells of another anecdote, where it is said that a church pastor, upon hearing Robert Johnson sing secular songs, ranted about the artist, selling his soul to the devil, which lacks the mystique of a Crossroads transaction, which, like, imagine if that's the legend we've been misconstruing this entire time. But let's get back to actual verifiable biographical information. Robert Johnson would travel the Mississippi Delta from Arkansas to Memphis to Mississippi, playing the blues, learning from the masters, and even, as some claim, looking for his birth father, though he would not succeed on that latter goal. He even took his street corner playing as far north as Chicago, according to some records. He was known to play on street corners and actually focused on the more popular songs of the era as opposed to singing strictly the blues, in an attempt to get a broader audience. He was described as kind to folks and easy to get along with, but he was also very horny. He was known to be a prolific flirt and even is said to have cultivated relationships with women in every city he played for the purpose of having someplace to spend the night. And also, one might imagine, have sex. He even had a long-standing relationship with a woman, Estella Coleman, who was also the mother to another famous blues musician, Robert Lockwood Jr., with whom Robert Johnson occasionally performed and traveled with.
Robert Johnson be like, "That's not what your mom said last night." And it's like a non-fictional joke.
Robert Johnson was also known to have a bit of stage fright, but only if other musicians were in the audience who weren't Johnson's close friends. He was known to sometimes turn away while he performed, facing away from the audience if he knew that there was another blues singer around. Johnson was also described as being a very neatly dressed, cleaned-up man, despite the fact that he was constantly hitchhiking and jumping on trains and traveling in general. His friends often made fun of him for it, until Johnson would go, "Oh yeah? Well, your mom likes it when I keep myself clean," making, as I cannot stress enough, non-fictional your mom jokes. Johnson would also have a child with a woman named Virgie Mae Smith, and would actually go back on his promise from earlier and decide to marry another woman named Coletta Craft in 1931. But she would also pass away very shortly afterwards in 1932, which is a heartbreaking thing to have happen twice.
There's also this quote that I saw on Wikipedia that I thought sums this up pretty well. It's from another blues musician by the name of Johnny Shines, who would occasionally travel with the vagabond rock star. This is from Samuel Charter's book, simply titled Robert Johnson, which I did not read because I think I read more for this story than I usually do for most. So Wikipedia will cover it for me.
Robert was a very friendly person, even though he was sulky at times, you know?
Like, I have a feeling I know why.
And I hung around Robert for quite a while. One evening, he disappeared. He was kind of a peculiar fellow. Robert would be standing up and playing someplace, playing like nobody's business. At about that time, it was a hustle with him as much as a pleasure. And money'd be coming from all directions. But Robert would just pick up and walk off and leave you standing there playing. And you wouldn't see Robert no more, maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. So Robert and I, we began journeying off. I was just, matter of fact, tagging along.
But the life of a top 40 show tune singing vagabond was not enough to satiate the artistic palate of this rock star. So in 1936, he decided to seek out a recording studio and finally record his own original song.
A man by the name of Henry Columbus Spear owned a general store in Prospect, Mississippi, but he also managed a record store and developed a reputation for being a blues singer talent scout. Robert Johnson sought out Spear, who got Johnson in contact with the American Record Company.
Johnson met up with producer Don Law in San Antonio, Texas, in the November of 1936. Don Law was a prolific country music producer, working with such notable acts as Johnny fucking Cash. That is the only one I need to bring up to prove this guy's credentials. On the mezzanine of the Gunter Hotel in San Antonio, Johnson met up with Law, as well as a few other acts that were recording that day. And though Johnson's musician-composed audience stage fright prompted the blues singer to need a minute before getting into it, Johnson would go on to make history, as well as record 2 different takes of 16 different songs, including Crossroads Blues, Love in Vain, I Believe I'll Dust My Broom, and Hellhound on the Trail. Wait a second. It is dawning on me that the song Hellhound on My Trail warrants a lyric analysis. As it turns out, it may or may not have to do with hell, so if I accidentally sing anything, it's a parody. Okay. Gotta keep moving, Hellhound on my trail. All I need is a sweet little rider all around your daddy's door. Keeps me a rambling man rider. Nope. It just turns out this one's also horny, in my humble opinion. I think the song is about somebody having relations with married women and then needing to leave very quickly afterwards. Next. Alrighty, where was I? Okay. Robert Johnson was recording some music, but when one is able to record songs on a hotel mezzanine, it kind of begs the question, how exactly does one record a song in the 1930s? So now I would like to segue into my next section. Oh, fuck. Oh my god. Oh, I'm about to talk about engineering, aren't I? Oh, fuck. Oh my lord, I am not going to understand a single part of this. Okay, engineering. We're on Wikipedia. From 1877 to 1925, everything was mechanical instead of electrical. Fucking large cones collected the air pressure of sound waves, which moved a small little stylus thing, which scratched at wax, I guess, and that made vinyl records, I guess. Wikipedia forgot to mention what exact form of fucking sorcery allows that to happen. But the fidelity was low, and everyone had to play the trumpet, because bassy instruments weren't getting picked up, so that's why swing was so big in the 20s. But as technology improved, people are allowed to play bass in the lower guitar parts now, so I guess that's why blues and country were getting popular, but none of this would be possible if it weren't for Western Electric's integrated system of electrical microphones, electronic signal amplifiers, and electromechanical recorders, and a stack of scrolls from Merlin's fucking castle. This was a hybrid mechanical-electrical process, which meant that artists didn't have to record in the cone room, and audio could be edited during the recording, but not in post, because the wax was already cut. But I guess not always, I guess. Johnson was recording on a 78 RPM device. RPM affects which hertzes of sound can be recorded, even though that was the RPM that they used on earlier mechanical models, so I guess it's a fidelity thing. I think you can get full vinyl albums of this sort, like at this point in time, and the first LP, or long-playing record, was a fucking recording of Beethoven's Fifth in 1931. But Robert Johnson just kind of recorded his songs as singles, I think. I don't think they used the word single back in the day, but it's not like he was making LPs or EPs or whatever, and he made sure that he limited all of the songs to 3 minutes for whatever reason, and his song, Terror Playing Blues, was the first single not single to be produced, with only the B-side, because you can record on both sides of the vinyl, being Last Fair Deal Gone Down, which is holy fuck, am I going to need to do a lyrical analysis of that song too? The one with the deal in the title? I am 3 tangents in right now and trying to read the fucking Necronomicon of music production lore. I am... Last fair deal gone down, last fair deal gone down on that Gulfport Island Road. What's that? Is that an intersection? I don't know. Oh, it's a railroad, I think. Idabelle, don't cry this time. If you cry about a nickel, you die about a dime. Oh fuck, that one went off. I love the way you do. My captain's so mean to me. This is a parody also. Take Camp Baby and sing I'm working my way back home. Good lord. Nah, I can't really figure this one out here. I think it's just about being poor. Definitely no Satan here, though. And then Don Law and Robert Johnson put their hands together and summoned the great demon lord Astaroth to help them put sound on a vinyl. Because that's something that we can do in the 1930s. We figured out how to do that as a society, all on our own. Terraplane Blues sold 10,000 copies, which is actually really impressive in regards to, like, Johnson's first ever release. He made a second trip to Texas in the June of 1937 for a longer recording session, wherein he not only re-recorded the first 16 songs he wrote twice, he recorded 13 more, also twice. This session was produced by Vocalion Records, and though I wasn't able to find a specific number anywhere, testimonials claim that the songs sold pretty lucratively, even while Robert Johnson was still alive. Despite this, a full compilation LP wouldn't be produced until 1961, titled The King of the Delta Blues Singers, published by Columbia Records, though he would have his singles feature on a general blues singer compilation in 1959. Despite this being the start of the satanic mythology, it was actually Preachin' Blues that was the first song to feature on such a compilation. So the subtitle to that song is Up Jump the Devil, but in the interest of keeping the sanctity of the comedy rule of threes sacred, I already looked up the lyrics. Spoilers, there's no references to making a deal with the devil in it, trust me. It was actually Preachin' Blues that was the first song to feature on such a compilation.
And not Crossroads Blues. And look at that. I've seamlessly segued into the next topic I want to talk about. The origin of the Devil at the Crossroads motif as a whole.
So remember when I did that bit earlier where I drink a lot of alcohol? Memorizing is going to be harder. And this next section is one of those long sections where in the script it's like, say it with your face. So we're all going to politely ignore the fact that I'm obviously reading from a computer screen for the next minute. If we're talking deities, Witch Mommy Hecate from Greece is associated with Crossroads, as is Hermes/Mercury from Greece/Rome, Odin from Norway sometimes, and Ishu/Alegba for those Terrell Alvin McCraney fans. That is a theater person deep cut. Shoutouts to the Yoruba religion though. Like, probably 1 out of 10 of you knows where Ishu/Alegba comes from, and 1 out of 50 of you knows who Terrell Alvin McCraney is. The thought is that crossroads were a representation of change and transitions, liminal spaces, and the moon sometimes when it came to Witch Mommy Hecate. But none of these guys are a Satan parallel, except for maybe Hermes sometimes. He can go to the underworld. But I must indulge the Christian faith specifically for this exploration. In medieval, the British Isles, criminals and people who committed suicide were considered too profane for a Christian burial at a church. So they were often buried at a crossroads, sometimes after having their body dragged through the street and then stabbed in the heart under the light of the full moon. Before they got buried at a crossroads, like where in the Bible did they get that one? Why did they do that? That was weird. Apparently, the crossroads were chosen because it would confuse the restless spirits of the deceased. Why? So I didn't reference this earlier, but I got this from Why the English Buried Suicides at Crossroads article written by someone named Kabir on the website Medium for, like, the source on that. Didn't mention it before, now I am. Also Wikipedia.
More relevant, however, is our favorite German alchemist, Faust. Germany reference, Foxxo Esoterica bingo card moment. Faust summoned Mephistopheles with a demonic circle at a crossroads, according to some accounts of the legend. A lot of articles claim that the mainland medieval Europeans hold an association with demons in Crossroads, but when one tries to Google the origins of that particular piece of folklore, one tends to get swamped with articles about hit show Supernatural. Eric Kripke continues to ruin my day. Hey, that should be a Foxxo Esoterica bingo card spot. Eric Kripke killing my vibe. But in regards to Crossroads being used as a cultural touchstone in general, the TLDR is that people love a liminal space at night, and if folklore is going to designate a place to consort with spirits, Crossroads work well. But as soon as Christians see any spirit that isn't OG God himself, there's probably going to be a degree of associating those spirits with Satan. And also, Robert Johnson's manufactured mythology is something I am going to get into specific detail with shortly, but before I do that, I would like to talk about the final years of Robert Johnson's life. Actually, not even years plural. Tragically, he only died 14 months after his last recording session. So, as is common with most aspects of this story, Robert Johnson didn't keep many memoirs, and the affairs of people of color often didn't get into print with white journalists, even with successful musicians. So while there is a specific death certificate made in Mississippi for Robert Johnson, it only states the date and location of the artist's death, and not the cause. To this day, Robert Johnson's death remains a mystery, but I cannot express enough how little that has to do with Satan. But yes, at age 27, Robert Johnson passed away on the 16th of August, 1938.
and the town of Greenwood, Mississippi. His death certificate wasn't even found until 30 years after his death. Shoutouts to Mac McCormick for that one.
The leading theory in regards to Robert Johnson's death is syphilis. That's all but confirmed, but the second most popular theory is a tad bit more dramatic and involves Robert Johnson getting poisoned by the husband of a woman that he slept with. And though, at first glance, this anecdote feels a tad bit folkloric, far less than the Satan stuff for sure, and unlike the Satan stuff, this particular urban legend kicked off only a couple years after Robert Johnson's death, there was a degree to which it might hold water. Nobody questions the grammar of the sentence that I just said, please. It was not great and reading it was hard. When the historian, Mac McCormick, investigated matters, the strongest majority of his findings involved Robert Johnson playing in a country dance in Greenwood, Mississippi, starting to feel ill around 2 a.m, needing to be taken to town, and passing away shortly afterwards. Some people reported seeing Robert Johnson drink a bottle of whiskey, then convulse, and shortly pass away. And for whatever reason, others reported that he suddenly started crawling around on all fours, barking like a dog, and then dying. McCormick may have actually also met with someone claiming to be the man who poisoned Johnson, because of the adultery. And at least as far as I could find, everyone remained anonymous, especially the alleged murder. Though whether they chose to remain anonymous or it's just a factor of history moving on, it's hard to say. Either way, anonymity is a strong deterrent for fame, but as it stands, from these reports alone, it is impossible to 100% discern the cause of Robert Johnson's death.
When it came to Johnson's friends, there was a degree of bewilderment to their finding out about the death as well. House and Lockwood would go on to report hearing that Johnson got stabbed by someone, or that he got poisoned by a woman, or that he started acting like a dog before dying randomly. That one keeps coming up. To quote a quote from yet another one of Johnson's blues singer's friends, David Honeyboy Edwards,
"He was poisoned 3 miles from Greenwood, Mississippi. He was playing for a country dance, but he was living in Greenwood at the time. About 2 o'clock, he got so sick they had to bring him back to town, and he died in Greenwood. Was buried out from Greenwood, out at a place called Three Forks, not far from where he was playing." And as far as we know, whether it was poison, a disease, or a supernatural curse after all, these are the only facts we can be certain about in regards to the death of the King of the Delta Blues. Equally uncertain is the site of Johnson's actual grave, though a memorial grave was erected near Quito, Mississippi.
With a repertoire of only 29 songs and a mere 2 recording sessions, the proverbial music history laymen may be scratching their head as to how exactly one might consider Johnson's legacy to be important to music history canon. Fortunately, I know a thing or two about music theory. And yes, I live a happier life than engineers. So allow me to explain a thing or two.
1. Johnson wasn't the first to use a boogie bass beat, but he was one of the first to record it, quickly prompting it to become popular among musicians enough to proliferate the technique across blues canon entirely. What is a boogie bass beat, aka a walking boogie beat? Instead of just strumming chords, Johnson would play a melody, or main line of music, with the lower notes on the guitar. He certainly would play melodies on higher strings on sections where he wasn't singing, but it was the use of the prominent bass line that Johnson excelled at for verses and such, at a time where people just sort of played chords while they sang. Thank you, electrical/mechanical hybrid recording methods, for allowing this. There was also a heavy focusing on a driving line, utilizing the 5th and 6th intervals in a key, which makes no sense if you don't study music theory. So if I sing a chord, bam 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 bam, and then sing the 5th and 6th notes in a pattern as such, bum ba-dum 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 bum, it's that thing right there that would inspire a lot of rock musicians. 2. As I mentioned before, Johnson made as sure as possible that his songs were ideal for recording. From the entire timing of the song matching the RPM of the vinyl, I am not getting into engineering again. But also, he knew about the contemporary recording device's new ability to use bassier frequencies, and was one of the first recording artists to employ heavier bass in his music. 3. Johnson wasn't the first to use chords with atonal notes, like diminished chords or minor 7th chords, but much like his other methods of musical inspiration, the use of these atonal chords in blues certainly became far more popular after Johnson's recorded songs went public. And 4. Johnson may or may not have picked up a couple of songs while on the blues circuit. It's tricky to discern which ones he wrote himself entirely and which ones he adapted lyrics for, but he was really good at lyricism. This isn't a technical analysis of his lyrics as opposed to an emotional analysis, but in my opinion, he's great at metaphor. He's great at capturing specific references to where he lived and the times he lived in and just general things that somebody at that point in time would think about. And he's good at capturing a sense of immense struggling while also capturing a sense of appropriate humor for that sweet, sweet juxtaposition.
Sometimes, the lyrics were horny. I read an article online about Bob Dylan, who said if he didn't hear the innuendo of some of Johnson's lyricism at a time where it wouldn't have been appropriate, he wouldn't have developed that confidence for some of his songs. So we love an artist that sticks it to the Puritans. And speaking of inspiration, just think of any rock star. They probably have a quote floating around about being inspired by Johnson. Notable inclusions include Chuck Berry, Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, notorious anti-vaxxer who I hate, I won't let him get away with it, Bob Dylan, I said that one already, and of course, John Darnielle, Mountain Goats. The 1996 album Nothing for Juice has a cover of Hellhound on my trail. He didn't use the boogie beat, though I am an encyclopedic repository of Mountain Goats knowledge. There are also probably more ways in which Johnson inspired music as a whole, but I've got to keep moving. Blues falling down like hail. This is a parody. Out of a cruel sense of poetic irony, the last section of this episode will detail the birth of the legend of Robert Johnson's fateful encounter with the devil at the Crossroads. I'd like to end here, because without this aspect to the story, Robert Johnson would easily be more of a household name in regards to famous musicians. But instead, in an unfortunate twist of fate, he is regarded as the man who sold his soul for a shot at fame, and for unearned magical talent. Indeed, his struggles were real, his practice was authentic, and his skill was very much bona fide, but at the end of the day, all of that gets brushed aside in order to foolishly focus on Faustian fairy tales. And I find that quite tragic. Total side note, this little part of the research process is very hard, because if you Google Robert Johnson Crossroads myth origin or something like that, every article is like, here's the truth about Robert Johnson. He never went to any crossroads, you idiot. You've been duped. I know that, I promise. That's why I'm making this video. I want to know why people think that. I want to know where that came from. I will not be getting too into the 27 Club, because as I mentioned before, I find that informal list/conspiracy theory/legend to be very random, only existing because of the fickle human pattern-seeking brain needing enrichment in its bony enclosure. But for the sake of not being a bitch and ignoring it entirely, famous musicians such as Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison of The Doors, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, and Amy Winehouse died at the age of 27, as did Robert Johnson. The thought is that these folks were only famous because they made deals with Satan in exchange for their soul, which could be collected at a random point whenever these folks turned 27. It is important to note no one died on their birthday, not a single one of the people I mentioned. This theory only exists because of the Robert Johnson devil stuff, which I'll get to now. And also probably because people love a really good ghost story, but I will not be looking into the psychology of this sort of thing because I have talked about the 27 Club enough already as is, so we're moving on. Which I'll get to now. Alright, so as I mentioned before, Columbia Records released the compilation album King of the Delta Blues Singers in 1961. And though a good number of recordings and blues standards/sheet music were going around, indeed, Johnson never really left the zeitgeist. This compilation album was immediately successful. A second compilation would be released in 1970, comprised of the remaining songs. So, we have a talented blues singer's recordings, once again hitting the mainstream. Everyone loves the music. Nobody knows a single thing about Robert Johnson's history, as all of the major blues historians would start their work after the compilation album's released. What's going on? The answer is boring. There were general vibes going around of people joking about selling your soul to the devil, and then the stories of Johnson not being good at guitar when he was a child, but then being good at the guitar later, kinda came up, and the people listening to him in the 60s were like, who's this blues singer again? How was he so suddenly good? And didn't he die mysteriously? And didn't I hear about someone selling their soul to the devil down south with a guy that showed up and tuned the guitar? It was a Johnson, wasn't it? And maybe people 20 years later probably jump on board this legend in interviews because scary stories are fun, and regurgitating them gets you into the newspapers. Yeah, I've talked about this already. But perhaps the biggest reason this myth exists is the fact that in 1968, they made a movie about Robert Johnson. It's called Crossroads. I hope you've had fun with this Foxxo Esoterica episode. I think that counts as the conclusion. Once again, I do not believe in Satan. Let's do the review corner, baby! There's a Robert Johnson Crossroads entry on Google Maps. It's just south of Clarksdale, Mississippi, at where Old Highway 49 and Jonestown Claremont Road meet. I don't know if this is the confirmed location, but let's see what people have to say about it. Dean Haney writes, prime real estate for a TikTok influencer. I came here to sell my soul to the devil until I learned Robert Johnson became amazing at playing the guitar by practicing with Isaiah Ike Zimmerman in the cemetery. Hashtag Delta Blues. 5 stars. I love it that right off the bat people are doing their research. Let's see how well that continues. Antonio Silva writes, I liked it. Now I know where the famous Crossroads, Mississippi is, where Robert Johnson has his famous story of the blouses. I want to visit. 5 stars. Thurston Howell III writes, I'll be at this location between the here and now to sell Bibles and potions of all sorts, including black magic. Ones to move between the light and dark. Please bring your soul. Jesus saves lives. 5 stars. The name of someone in a Thai font writes, this is Robert's place. Did you come here to make a contract with the devil? Please explain. 5 stars. Alright. I was doing a bit just now, what with the cutting of the episode short. But I did it to illustrate a point. The grueling years of historian work have far less of a sway on the general public than stories of the fantastic. And I, prolific paranormal content creator, am hardly the one to hate on that too much. But as far as I can find, there should be very little actual reason that anyone believes Robert Johnson went down to the Crossroads to meet with the devil, other than a movie, a few word-of-mouth stories, and the good vibes of a ghost story. I already said my piece on the legacy of Robert Johnson, and honestly, I want that to be the main takeaway of this story. And though I really went out and talked about it in a poetic way towards the latter half of this episode, as opposed to the beginning, I didn't really want to save that point for the very end at least. Which I'm doing anyway, right now. But at the very least, I wanted to share the actual story of this incredibly influential musician, in addition to the urban legend stuff. And in regards to the urban legend stuff, that's just the nature of urban legends, baby. These sorts of legends are going strong in the current day, and you can probably think of 2 or 3 off the top of your head that are just passed around for years without a hint of record keeping. And by the time someone with the mental wherewithal to writes it down, there's no real origin to the myth to write about outside of what ends up getting distilled in the end. And with that, video over. The next one will be about something entirely unrelated to anything I've done before on Foxxo Esoterica. You can find these videos on YouTube, but you can also find the audio on Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and Spotify. The podcast version of the last episode got, 0 engagement, so I don't know how long I'll be doing that. Ooh, glasses are going away. But if you like that, let me know. You can support Foxxo Esoterica at Patreon or Ko-fi at FORSETIFOX at both. And you can follow me on TikTok at FORSYFOX. A part of the masked hair is getting in my eye. And you can also follow me on Twitter at FORSETIFOX. Oh my god, what was the outro thing? Oh yeah. All research, recording, editing, and music is done by me, and furry art is done by these artists. At this point, I haven't edited yet, so I don't know which ones I'll be using. But here they are, and you can follow them at these links. And I'll also put them in the description, so you don't have to worry about missing them. Yeah, episode over. If I had my guitar over in Germany, I'd probably do a little guitar outro bit. But as it stands, we're going to be doing a slow fade.